My name is Josephine Ross. I first heard of Baba in 1931. My mother, who had always been interested in spiritual matters and the search for spiritual truth, heard of him through Malcolm Schloss, who was Jean Adriel's husband at that time. And he had a bookstore in New York where he sold books of philosophy and Oriental religions and that sort of thing. And I was very much impressed when I met Malcolm. And although I'd never written anything in the way of poetry before, I wrote a very little poem when I first met Malcolm. And shortly after that, I went to Harmon, where Baba was staying, Harmon on the Hudson. I had a very, well, I'd say, slight background in studies about metaphysics. I had been to different groups in New York. I didn't know much about masters. I'd heard vaguely about them, but I didn't have any idea of what a master was or could be, or why one would need one. I went into this very beautiful stone house on the Croton River, where people were milling about. I was only 23 at the time, rather an unworldly person, and I was told to come up. I saw people coming down the stairs from the room where they told me Baba was. Some of them were weeping, tears rolling down their eyes, but I just suddenly felt very, very happy, and they told me my turn had come. I went up the stairs and opened the door, and there was a great long room with a balcony out over the river on one side, and way at the end of the room, sitting on a black and orange divan, was this person. He was dressed in a little brown woolly jacket, and he had beautiful big brown eyes and lovely brown hair. And I just paused as if something had stopped me in the doorway. And I don't remember whether somebody told me to come forward or what, but I just went right forward to the couch where he was sitting and kneeled in front of him and looked at him. And I thought, well, I know him. I knew him instantly. And afterwards, my remembrance of that moment was, well, now I know Christ lived on earth because here he is. This is Christ. So after a few moments, Baba asked me, is there something you'd like to ask me? And I said, yes, I would like to know how, I would like to be able to help people. I would like to help people. That was my words, I think. And without hesitation, Baba said, well, first you have to know how. That never occurred to me. I thought I was going to run around the world opening my hands and helping everybody, you know? Just this idea of selfless service. And his very practical rejoinder to me struck me as so, well, I mean, it was so the right answer. You have to know how. It never occurred to me before. I had no training, nothing of that sort. So I was with him only a short while then. And I remember I walked rapidly out of the room. It was so the right answer. You have to know how. It never occurred to me before. I had no training, nothing of that sort. So I was with him only a short while then. And I remember I walked rapidly out of the room and turned just to look at him, wave sort of as if to say, well, goodbye, friend, I know who you are. And then from that time on, all the time I stayed in the house, it was just like living in another world. It was up in a state of exaltation. It was the way you would be if you're in love with somebody and you're just walking on pink clouds. Everything revolved about Baba and what Baba was doing and whether he needed something, whether he wanted something. People coming out from New York went up to see him, came down, everybody buzzing about. But my mother and I and Malcolm and Jean Adriel were to stay there in the house while Baba was there. But a group of us who had come were to sleep that night in a guest house nearby. There were quite a number of us. Some Mr. McKee from Gould Farm and several other people. So we went to the guest house that evening. In the middle of the night, the house got on fire. I remember Mr. McKee running up and down the corridors in his flannel pajamas. House is on fire, everybody out, house is on fire, everybody out. And everybody got out. But nothing was saved. Nobody thought of saving anything. We were ushered back over to the house where Baba was, and all we could think of was how marvelous to think that we don't have to stay in the house away from Baba. We can be right in the house with Baba. I don't think anybody tried to even save clothes or anything. It just didn't occur to us. We were just delighted that we could be in the same house where Baba was. And they bedded us down in various places. I don't remember all the details, because it didn't matter. Whether you had pajamas on or a coat or any old thing, didn't matter at all. Anyway, the next day, some of the people left that had come with us, but we were to stay on, Mother and I. And Baba was there 3 weeks. And during that 3 weeks, people kept coming out from New York. Certain ones had the duty to prepare his food. And I was always thrilled when I could take the lentils and the rice up to the room where Baba was for him to eat. That's what he mostly had, as far as I can remember. And he always ate in his room with his disciples. And I used to take it up. It was just like taking, an offering to God, really, you might say, when you took something to Baba. And occasionally you could peek through the door when he was busy and just catch a glimpse of him. There were times when we were allowed to stay, some of us, in his room. He didn't talk to us. He sat quietly. Occasionally he'd have his eyes closed as if he wasn't there in the body at all. And we just sat and looked at him. Just if we could absorb him with our eyes. It was just the way a cat would look at a mouse that was going to eat. It just, you couldn't get enough of him. Just look and look and look. And the absolute silence, you know. It could be half an hour at a time, and you never felt that it was too much time. And one time Baba said to me, "You are very fortunate to meet me now." He said that in India, thousands of people would give everything just to be near me as you are. And he said, later, there'll be such crowds around me that you won't be able to get near me. And of course, at that time, he wasn't well known in the West, and probably not as well known as he is now in the East. And it was a prophetic statement, because it certainly was true that poetry, there was no other way of expressing time. And one time Baba said to me, "You are very fortunate to meet me now." He said that in India, thousands of people would give everything just to be near me as you are. And he said, later, there'll be such crowds around me that you won't be able to get near me. And of course, at that time, he wasn't well known in the West, and probably not as well known as he is now in the East. And it was a prophetic statement, because it certainly was true that aside from those 2 visits that he made to Harmon, I saw very little of Baba later. And I didn't realize what a privilege it was, because I just sort of took it for granted, the way you do the sunshine. Here it was, and I was here, and that was it. I didn't know that it meant such a tremendous thing to be able to be weeks, days and nights in the same house with the Avatar, and to wait on him and to sit in his presence in silence. After he left the first time, well, it was just as if he took our life with him. He left us empty, you know. I tried to express it in some of the poems. And that's when I started writing. I just couldn't stop it. I just had to write poetry to Baba. There was no other way of expressing what I felt. And as fast as I'd write them, type them out, I'd send them to him to India. And when he had the journal, the Baba journal, for 4 years, several of the poems appeared in that. But it was just as if he opened the floodgates. He pushed a button, and all these things kept coming out. And I wasn't consciously sitting down to write. It was just something that I had to write. It came to me, and I had to put it down, that's all. And that went on. I mean, since then, I have continued off and on to write poetry, mostly about Baba, sometimes about other subjects, but he was the inspiration that started it. When he came back in the spring, he only stayed a few days. And I remember we went to the railroad station where he was leaving in the night to catch the train at Harmon, and it just seemed the most sad thing to have him leave us. It's just like taking our life, our soul, right out of us, you know. And he went to India, he went back to California and out, I think, to China, and then back to India. It always seemed as though it wasn't any use living unless you were living where Baba was. It was years before he came back. And in the meantime, I met my husband, who was the brother-in-law of Meredith Starr, who founded the retreat in East Shallicombe, where Baba first came to the West. And when we met, we knew instantly that we knew each other. There wasn't any question. It was just as if we'd always known each other. We probably had from the past. Only at that time I thought I dedicated my life purely to Baba and I wasn't going to marry anybody. And I told him so. I don't know whether he even waited till he asked me to marry him. So he went away for a year. He went up to Canada and Alaska and various places. And in the meantime, I sort of hovered around doing nothing much. And then when he came back, I said, without waiting for him to ask me, I'll marry you now if you still want me. And in a very short time, we were married. And of course, his life had been dedicated to Baba in East Alicombe. Well, at that time, I thought I dedicated my life purely to Baba and I wasn't going to marry anybody. And I told him so. I don't know whether he even waited till he asked me to marry him. So he went away for a year. He went up to Canada and Alaska and various places. And in the meantime, I sort of hovered around doing nothing much. And then when he came back, I said, without waiting for him to ask me, I'll marry you now if you still want me. And in a very short time, we were married. And of course, his life had been dedicated to Baba in East Alicombe. And when we got ourselves a little place in the country where we could have a farm and possibly a center for Baba at that time. We only saw Baba very briefly in the years that followed. And I'm not too clear about those visits because I wasn't very well. It was a long period when I had moods of depression or moods of excitement, which I had before I met Baba, and it seemed to be a long pull to get out of that entirely, so I still had them. But I do remember clearly after my husband died, and I was in a hospital at the time when he died. I didn't know he died till I came out of my state of mind. And if I hadn't had Baba to reassure me inwardly, I don't think I could have taken it, because I went to the phone to call my husband up, and they told me casually, well, your husband died. And, I said, where are the children? Well, your aunt took them up to Albany. This was in New Jersey then. And at the time, instead of being overwhelming, it just seemed as though I was able to accept all that. And Baba, I kept thinking of Baba, and it just didn't overwhelm me the way it might have. And when I came out of the hospital later, I came up to Albany and started to work up here. My children were up in this section, and I finally got a little home together where they came with me. But always, all through whatever happened, it was always Baba, the thought of Baba, I think, that kept me going, because he was the one thing that was always clear. The memories of him, the thought that he was there, the thought that you could contact him by thought inwardly. And I think that in spite of the fact I had a lot of ups and downs after I met him, it was something I had to work out, probably from former karma. And then when I came up to Albany, I began to get on my own feet and stand on my own feet and learn to take care of myself in a practical way, which I had never done before. I'd always been either dependent on my mother or dependent on my husband or other members of the family. And it was in 58 Baba came back. Was it 58? I think so. We went down to New York to see him, my two older daughters and myself, which was the last time I ever did see him. Was it 56? 2 years after I came to Albany. Are you sure? Anyway, he was staying at a hotel. And we went to the reception. We went to the lunch, and then after we went to the reception, I guess, where he was seeing people. And as I entered the room, he put his hand up over his forehead as if to indicate, well, I didn't know what he meant, because he was only using gestures then. He had used an alphabet word when I first met him. People. And as I entered the room, he put his hand up over his forehead as if to indicate, well, I didn't know what he meant, because he was only using gestures then. He had used an alphabet word when I first met him. He used to flip his hand over it, and then his disciples would interpret it. And the words came so fluently from the disciple that you always came out of the room saying, Baba said so-and-so, and Baba said this. You never had the feeling Baba wasn't speaking, because his hands moved so fast and they interpreted so fast. But then when he gave that up, he just used gestures. And they knew his gestures and interpreted for that just as smoothly as they had with the alphabet board. It was amazing, because you always felt Baba was saying this, although it was actually with the voice of one of his disciples. So in this instance, he put his hand back over his face, his forehead, and the disciple said, he means Kenneth Ross, who was bald. This is his wife. And I was so surprised that after all the years and the thousands of people Baba knew, that without a moment's hesitation, he'd right away connect me and Kenneth. And of course, he knew the two girls. So we saw him there very briefly. I remember standing in a group and only being able to see his bare foot. And I thought, that's the foot of God. Absolutely amazing to be looking at God's foot. And then later he had a little reception for people. They were coming in and out of the room. And he was paying attention to everybody, you know. Of course, in the days of Harmon, I'd been spoiled. I'd been so close there and been so much with him. And I just said, Baba. And he turned quickly and he looked at me. And then he turned away. But that one look was enough. I mean, it just was a reward. It was just something that you could remember all your life. Just an instant's look. He responded. And I didn't feel I needed anything more. I didn't feel I needed hours in his presence. Whatever it was he gave me in that look, he gave it. So that was the last time I saw him physically. But I feel always as if, I never felt as if he was actually away, because he was so real a part of my life inwardly. My thoughts would turn to him. Not all the time. Actually, one has to be concerned with everyday affairs, and Baba says we must. When I'm working, I'm thinking about everyday affairs, but every once in a while, a poem would come to me, and I'd scribble it on the back of a scrap of paper in the office when I'm supposed to be doing something else, and then I'd type it out. I remember one poem came with the music came with it, and I called my landlady up, who's a musician, and sang it to her over the phone in the middle of the morning, and she copied it down, made a very nice accompaniment to it, and we used it as a Christmas carol when we went around singing at Christmas time. Whenever the thoughts come, I got to put them right down then, or I lose them. It's never a premeditated thing. It's a mood that comes, and the words seem to come after I start writing it. So I feel as if they're given, you see, from some inner plane. I never really feel that I'm writing. I'm just transcribing some of these thoughts. I don't know where they come from. But that happened after I met Baba. I mean, I never had done that before. Now, I really don't know what else you want me to say, and so if you have some questions, I'd like to have them to come from. But that happened after I met Baba. I mean, I never had done that before. Now, I really don't know what else you want me to say, and so if you have some questions, I'd like to have them.
What was your feelings when you heard that Baba dropped his body?
Well, at first I felt very sad, very empty, but it didn't last long. I had written him a poem just the day before, and it didn't last long. It seemed as though, well, I haven't been with him physically anyway all these years, and it's just the same thing. I haven't been near his physical body, and his real self is much more real, so it didn't bother me very long. It was kind of a shock because some of us had been planning to go over to see him. But the feeling of emptiness lasted a very short time, because always I've really got more of my thoughts of Baba when I haven't been with him. I think when you're with him, you're so absorbed in the atmosphere and the feeling, you're not even thinking. But when you're away from him, then you can sort of think about what you experienced and what he meant. And to me, he was just alive all through the years without being near him physically. And I think so many people who've only heard of Baba since he passed on have that same experience, because not having met him physically, they still get Baba. The physical is almost too much, you know, it was almost too overwhelming. So I think that many people have just as much of Baba who never met him, just as many people didn't meet Jesus in the flesh and yet became completely absorbed in the real Jesus. Mm-hmm. I think they do, because that's the inner contact.
What about the Baba's humor? Did you ever witness any?
I did, but I can't remember the exact instances. But you always felt that Baba was fun to be with. You didn't always feel solemn in his presence. And sometimes you did. Sometimes you were just adoring him and worshiping him. But there were other times when you just felt as if he was a pal. He was just another playmate. And I think that was the wonderful part about him. He was so well-rounded. He wasn't, you could never in this world call him, well, like over-religious people are, fanatics, you know. They're very prissy and prim and proper. He was a human being among human beings. But at the same time, he was on a level that made everything pure, everything of a higher vibration, I should imagine. So that you felt, well, isn't this fun? This is just like being with a beautiful child. I think that would be, and I did see instances of his humor, but I can't remember any specific thing. Just he was always lots of fun to be with.
Could you read to us one of your favorite poems?
Yes, if that will. Maybe I should read this one. When I first met him, I will explain how I felt. It's called Reunion. O love, had I forgotten until I saw thee here, down through all the centuries, lonely year on year, had I forgot thy voice, thy smile, and all thy winning grace, had I no recollection of the beauty of thy face, but if 'twas so, why did I then come running at thy call? My heart had not forgotten thee, who art my all in all. I had that instant feeling of knowing Baba. I probably had known him before, because he just seemed so, he was somebody I felt completely at home with from the start. I don't know if this one, do you think that little one I told you about would...
Oh, yes.
Well, this was written because of the fire that came. It was written with that in mind, the house that burned. I came to my beloved garlanded with flame, and now my heart is beating to the rhythm of his name. I came to my beloved through sorrow and through pain. My body had been strengthened by wind and sun and rain. My spirit had been beaten by the storms of life, bruised and yet triumphant over sin and strife. I came to my beloved sheathed in golden flame. My life is now attuned to the music of his name. And when he left, maybe that little one would do. That time he left us in Harmon. I can find it. Maybe I can't. I always like this one if I can find it. Maybe I have to look at me. Ooh, well, let's not bother that. Maybe you'll like this one instead. Crucified. Beautiful one, where goest thou with dancing feet and heart of love? I go to bring the living light to them that sit in darkness, and to awaken love divine in every weary soul. Beautiful one, whence comest thou with bleeding feet and heart of sorrow? I come from them that sat in darkness, now are they rejoicing, for I took upon myself the burden of their woe. Oh, I thought that one was right in front here. Wasn't that? Oh dear. Where is this one? When we went to the train to see Baba off, we didn't say anything. I think he put his hand out and I took his hand and he looked at us. And I think I noticed a star, falling star at the time. So I wrote this little thing. A star was caught in a pine bough, and a wind went softly by, and there was no one present, only you and I. The night was silent, silent, and our lips were silent too. Only my heart was speaking, voicing its love for you. Alas, my heart was weeping as we lightly said goodbye, but my lips were smiling, smiling. So I wrote this little thing. A star was caught in a pine bough, and a wind went softly by, and there was no one present, only you and I. The night was silent, silent, and our lips were silent too. Only my heart was speaking, voicing its love for you. Alas, my heart was weeping as we lightly said goodbye. But my lips were smiling, smiling, and a star fell down the sky.
Did you ever recite your poems to Baba personally?
No, I sent them to him. And they were put, quite a few of them went in the early journal, the Mayor Baba journal that was published in the 30s.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think I ever did say them to him personally, because I didn't see him much after that. I just wrote them and sent them to him as they came off the press. Off the typewriter, you might say. Now, there's one here that I'm sure people wouldn't understand unless they knew. This one I shouldn't forget that. Because one time I went up to Baba's room. There was a fireplace with a little raised platform in front of it. And there was no one else in the room at the time, apparently. So I remember it. And he sat down there, and I sat down beside him. And he reached out my hand and held it. And I looked away from him, and he was looking into the empty fireplace. And all of a sudden, I felt that he was gone. I just knew he was gone. He wasn't there. So afterwards, I wrote this, because it had a very deep impression on me.
Excuse me, Josephine, but when you said that he was gone, did you mean that he was physically gone?
Well, of course, he wasn't physically gone, as far as I know, but I wasn't looking at him. I just felt he wasn't there. I was alone. Now, what he had done probably was withdraw his spirit temporarily. But I didn't look to see. I just knew he wasn't there. That's all I felt, that he wasn't. And maybe this will explain it. Oh, love, love, let me clasp my arms about thee and hide my face in the soft clouds of thy hair. He did actually once. I put my hands around him, and he put his head down against me, just briefly, minutely, you know. It was such a sweet gesture. There was something so sweet about it. Or wilt thou rest thy head upon my breast for one brief moment, that I may know that thou hast need of me? Or let us sit, my hand in thine, upon the dais by the empty hearth, and let me turn up and look upon thy face, wherein lies all the beauty of my dreams and all the loveliness I never knew till now. Ah, love, love, thou hast looked away, and I too turn my eyes from so much beauty. In silence we two sit, hand clasped in hand, and suddenly I am aware, O lesson taught and learned in utter silence, that thou art gone and I am all alone. One moment thou art here beside me, and the next I am alone. What truth? Wilt thou rest thy head upon my breast for one brief moment, that I may know that thou hast need of me? Or let us sit, my hand in thine, upon the dais by the empty hearth, and let me turn up and look upon thy face, wherein lies all the beauty of my dreams and all the loveliness I never knew till now. Ah, love, love, thou hast looked away, and I too turn my eyes from so much beauty. In silence we two sit, hand clasped in hand, and suddenly I am aware, O lesson taught and learned in utter silence, that thou art gone and I am all alone. One moment thou art here beside me, and the next I am alone. What truth is this? That thou and I are one, there is no other. There is only I, or thou. What matter the name we give it? Master, Master, let there be only thou, and let me be no more. For only beauty is eternal, and thou art beauty. You see, that feeling that he was trying to indicate to me without words at all, that there aren't two people, there's only one. And of course it's true of everybody in the world. There's really only the one. And that he teaches without words, that was a remarkable thing. This is the one they made a song out of. Now there is one.
Josephine, when you wrote these poems, did you send them to Baba?
Yes.
And did Baba comment anything to you?
Well, they were used in the Baba Journal, a good many of them. Occasionally I'd have a little letter or note in the from Baba or from Adi to say that he had received it and liked them. But not always. I just sent them. I mean, they were my form of prayer or adoration to Baba. They were the only thing I had to give him. And
what was it that really convinced you of Baba's godhood?
I just knew it. It wasn't a matter of conviction. I felt it. As soon as I met him, I said, "This is Christ." It's not a matter of an intellectual concept. It's a matter of feeling. And I hadn't really, as I said, I didn't know even the word avatar was something I didn't know at that time. I didn't know the concept of the avatar coming back again and again. But I just felt, well, here is Christ. I had been a student of the Bible to some extent and thought a lot about Jesus. And when I met Baba, I said, well, I know Jesus lived now because here he is. Here he is now. There wasn't anybody telling me. There wasn't anything he did or said. I just knew it. That's something you can't put into an intellectual concept, really. If you don't feel it, you don't. I know people who met Baba and didn't feel a thing. He said, well, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't feel anything. Well, apparently they weren't ready, or they were on a different wavelength from him. Or, as the disciples said, Baba gives this understanding and feeling of love as a grace, and to those who either he's been connected with or who are ready for it. And some he closed himself off from them so they wouldn't feel anything. It was really up to him.
I'd like also, can you remember some of the incidents that happened when you were with Baba in Harmon? As to how the ashram came about?
Well, I don't remember too much of that. It had all been arranged before I came there that someone loaned the house. I don't remember the name of the person. And he indicated he wanted some of us to stay on through that winter and keep it open for him. And when he came back in the spring, we were there. Then he stayed such a short while, and afterwards it was decided that he wasn't going to be back for a while and they wouldn't keep it open. I don't remember any details to that, because actually all that was taken care of by certain people like Malcolm and Jean and Princess Machiavelli, who was there, Norina, and Anita, of course, was there, but she wasn't, she was just a young girl then. And, of course, Elizabeth Patterson, people like that. So those details, they weren't in my ken at all. I was just living in another world. I don't think I'd known if they told me. I probably wouldn't even remember it.
Did Baba have you playing any special role in his work for him at that time?
Well, I think he indicated he wanted me to help Malcolm. I think he was writing the publicity releases, and I was to type them, which I did at that time. And whatever had to be done, we helped around in the place. But as I say, most of the time I was so absorbed in my feeling of Baba that whatever I did sort of unconsciously. It was always Baba, 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 and I didn't pay much attention to those details. Whatever had to be done, I did, and that was it. I do remember once, this was also an inward experience though, standing downstairs on the balcony below Baba's room. It was very quiet. He was resting. And I indicated that in some other poem that wasn't published, that I just had the very profound conviction that was God resting upstairs. That I was standing below the balcony and Baba was up. God was resting up on that couch upstairs. Because these were all inward experiences. They didn't have to do with anything that happened outwardly. It was just convictions that came to me. So it's rather hard to say much about them. The only way I could express them was in writing about them afterwards.
That's beautiful.
Did you feel great joy?
Oh, yes. Tremendous. When Baba was there, it was just like living in a world of complete joy and bliss and purity and beauty. Then when he left, oh, goodness, it was just like a black night coming down on you. But still, the thought of him was always that sustained you, and you felt you were going to see him again. He was coming back. And just lived till he did come back. It wasn't any use living any other way. He was the only thing that mattered. Nothing else mattered.